of the book, and just did a bit of an overview of the text and the author. So this time we'll be thinking about the topic of prayer, so the chapter on prayer that we've been looking at. We'll have a similar format to last time, so mixture of breakout rooms, time to discuss, and some group feedback as well. But I just thought if we start just by doing a quick check-in, maybe a bit of a reflection on our journey in this book group so far, anything that's struck us since our last meeting, or any new insights or any reflections that we would like to share. And if anyone wants to just start us off.
Well, I would just say, Anna, that it just seems so timely. It's kind of incredibly timely. And I'm reading the second book at the same time about nonviolence, Christianity's Missing Peace. It's a new book. And it is also so timely. It's by an Irishman. And it's like, it kind of clarifies my thinking and helps me to realize that being a person of faith and a citizen are two separate paths. That's it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sylvia. Anyone else who wanted to share anything?
How have you found reading this next part of the book? Does it take you beyond where that introduction was really quite general? Has this helped in any way?
Well, I struggled with the first week, but I thought I can really get on with the reading this week. Absolutely got right into it.
Oh, that's great, Elizabeth. Sylvia, what was the name of the other book you were reading?
It's called Christianity's Missing Peace. And the peace is Peace.
Thank you. How have other people found the chapter, or just anything else they wanted to share that's come up for them?
I found it very challenging, so much that I'm writing Stations of the Cross for the parish, and it made me have to go back and rethink them all again.
Wow.
And I'd just like to say very quickly that I found the book absolutely brilliant. And I'd like to thank you so much for your introduction last week and for the way you introduced it. I hadn't got the book before the last meeting, and I only got it sort of the following week. But there was one thing that really struck me in the first bit. I don't want to go back too much, but he said, how would the world look if all Christians in Australia, Asia, Europe, Africa, North and South America were to commit themselves without reservation to peace? And that really struck me. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Garrett. Thanks for sharing that. Is anyone else who wanted to share anything?
I don't know, can you hear me, Anna?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Thomas Mar here. I'm just not sure if my video thing is working. Just two things stood out for me, Anna. It is a beautiful book and a very inspiring book. And I was struck by, on page 41, destructiveness. And he names it. He says it's the illusion of control. And I thought that was very powerful. I love the way he actually names it. And the myth of total control. And I think that is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And also the on page 46, the undeniable truth that peace in the world cannot be made without peace in the heart, so that it begins in the heart of human beings, because wars start by the decisions of mostly men. And it's what lies in the heart is what comes out through our actions. So I thought those two things I thought were very, very powerful. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Thanks for sharing that. I definitely, I've sort of reread this chapter again in preparation for tonight, but I think I definitely found it very challenging. And I think picking up on what Sylvia was saying as well, I was reading some of the prophets recently for work, and I was talking to one of my colleagues at work, and I was just saying how they seem to just be describing exactly what's happening now. And I think there is something in there with this idea of perhaps human nature as the nature of the world that I think you were touching on, which just still really speaks. And again, with this book, even though it was written quite a while ago, I think still very prophetic in itself. What I was thinking we could do then, just for the next maybe just 5 minutes, is just continue thinking about this in our breakout rooms. So I don't need to go into too much depth at the moment, because after we've done this, I'll go through a bit of a summary of the chapter, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth. If we could just think in our rooms, what stood out to you in the chapter, and were there any key themes, quotes, or passages that really spoke to you? So I will open the rooms now. Okay, there we go.
Will I go and see where I can?
Yeah. Do you want to? Shall I jump into room 3, and do you want to jump into one of the other ones?
It's showing me breakout room 1. I think
Or just whichever one you want to join.
I'm not seeing any of the other ones. That's the problem.
Okay. Well, if you join one, I'll join one of the other
That
ones.
all right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. There's all of them. So where are you going? You're going. You're
I'll
3,
jump into 3 just because there's the least people.
and also you've got a couple of new people as well. Thomas is a new one.
Thomas, are you able to join one of the rooms, or is it not working for you?
No, I can. I'll join with. I'll join room 1.
Okay.
Okay.
Seems like we were all
Prayer.
having a very good conversation in our breakout rooms and didn't want to come back. So sorry for dragging you out. Does anyone want to sort of briefly share what they were talking about or anything that came up for them?
Right, group one, I came to you late, so is there anybody in group one that wants to put forward some of the things that, very interesting things that we were talked about? Rab?
Or Rab, you're muted.
I think most people had a sense that the chapter spoke to their situation in various ways, and that many of the things they shared they could identify with, and that there was that sense of the way he describes prayer and how we enter into it is something that we could all do and possibly haven't done, and allowed us to see that, I think it was Elizabeth mentioned that often we can jump in or enter and think, we're the real peace activists and we'll get these people sorted out, which is totally against what he was talking about.
Thanks for sharing that, Rab. Is anyone from group 2 who wanted to share?
Were we in group 2?
We were
3.
We were 3.
All
You
right.
can feel free to jump in if you want to, Sylvia. Group 2 was Anne, David, Grace, Jan and June.
We talked about the banality of evil. We talked about how people who have experienced good people in certain contexts who then go on to be involved in things like military weapons, targeting military weapons, but very, very nice in their own families or in their own parish or, whatever, but they don't see a conflict in that. We talked about lots of things, really. We talked about the Benedictine idea that work is prayer and prayer is work. I spoke about my experience of silent prayer, which I find it's when I just wait for God. I don't use words. I just wait for God, and I feel that somehow helps me to be active outside the prayer time, if you like. But I think God has time for all sorts of. We talked about different kinds of prayer, and I think God's got a space for different kinds of prayer. Intercessory prayer and adoration, and different kinds of prayer. We talked about. Oh, sorry, the cat's going to wail. Sorry, Poppy, you're all right. You're okay. She's deaf, but that means that she's got a really loud voice. So she doesn't stop once she starts. So I might have to mute myself again.
Oh, she's got a right to her view as well.
And I think I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything from group 2 for that.
David, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and a differential, does one have to have peace in one's heart before engaging in sort of peace work in the world? Well, at least one alternative view would be that it's in fact a sort of interactive process, and that you learn more about you and God as you engage in sort of work for peace. The other is, and it arises a bit from the banality of evil, whether most people who are actually involved in warfare or arms manufacture are doing it out of hate. or just doing it because it's a job and they don't make connections with the rest of their faith.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think that's we can maybe talk about that a bit more later in the discussion. But that idea of the I suppose that's maybe a cyclical process that or does action come first and then the prayer? I think that's an definitely an interesting one. And I think what you were saying, Anne, as well, it was reminding me of that bit in the chapter on page 31 where he's talking about Hiroshima and the bomb as being seen as this good thing and even, being blessed. And yeah. Anyone from group 3 wanted to come in?
But I think we were probably dwelling around the 40s as well. But we were struck by the one on 42, or some of us were, that prayer is not primarily a way to get something done, but feeling that somehow maybe we were schooled in that way of thinking. And whoever said in group 1 or 2 that, there's all sorts of prayer. There's intercessory prayer, and that's also good. But maybe we we kind of stayed as that one kind of prayer. And then the other one, which maybe goes back to what David has just said, that prayer itself is an act. That seems to be, So we're putting, you pray first and then you act. But prayer itself is the act. And not to be, if we're kind of this call to live within God, within Jesus, somehow is living in love and casts out the strategies of fear. But I think they have a sneaky way of coming back in again, mind you.
So much so. I know I was giving my example of when I'm praying on the plane because I hate flying. That kind of very much fear-based.
You do a bit of bargaining.
Yes. Was anyone from group 3 who wanted to add anything? No. Rosalind, did you want to add anything? Or?
I think pretty much that whole emphasis around, the differentiation between prayer and action was what we were kind of talking about, I think, and a bit, I think, about how much we trust or don't trust, how that interlinks with prayer.
Yeah. Thanks very much, everyone, for sharing. So I'm just going to, I sort of wanted to just start with that for us to think about this that stood out to us. And then I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of the chapter now and some of the key themes, and we can sort of go into a little bit more depth in our discussion. So the chapter begins by claiming that a peacemaker prays. And we were thinking about last time how the aim of the book is to reflect on this spirituality of peacemaking. I think we can really see this chapter as core in that and rooting peace within spiritual practice through prayer. And within the chapter, we really find the centrality here of prayer being, from this quote, the beginning and the end, the source and the fruit, the core and the content, the basis and the goal of all peacemaking, which I think is quite interesting. Think about it as the goal as well. And really, I think it's roots in this understanding of peace, of speaking as peace as this divine gift. It's something that we receive in prayer. And we find this being linked in the chapter to Jesus' farewell discourse, the disciples and John. So my peace I leave to you, my own peace I give to you, peace the world cannot give. And I think, again, within that chapter, that's very significant. It's this gift that we don't achieve ourselves necessarily. It's not something that the world we can achieve within the world. So from that, the chapter moves on to talk about how we need to then move into this sphere where we can receive this peace. So away from the places that hate peace and towards this place of encounter with Jesus, who gives us this gift of peace. And so this is really how prayer is formed here. The chapter then goes on to speak about how we can be seduced by the cares of life, and frames this in terms of wounds and needs. So that could be our need to be recognised or to be praised. And even when we're trying to do something good, perhaps we want recognition for it. Or I think as someone was saying, we're the peacemakers, and this is what we're doing, and we're on this crusade. But really, it's talking about how these needs are rooted in our wounds. So maybe it's a past experience of being ignored, being unappreciated, or something that happened in childhood. I think we can kind of see some of the psychology coming out here. And essentially, this is framed as in terms of doubts about our own self-worth. So we go looking for self-esteem, for love in places that aren't necessarily going to fulfill that or aren't necessarily safe. And that can lead to actions which cause suffering, hurt, violence, even if perhaps we think we're doing that for a good reason. So the starting place of peace is framed as beginning with ourselves. And the chapter argues that if we cannot see the dark works of conflict and war in our own daily lives, we will never fully understand the cruelty, torture, and mass murder that fills the pages of our newspapers day after day. Though it may be easy to recognise the forces of darkness around us, it's very hard to recognise these same forces in our own good works. Only when we are willing repeatedly to confess that we too have dirty hands, even when we work for peace, can we fully understand the hard task of peacemaking. And I think, for me anyway, I think that's one of the more challenging parts of the chapter. And I think it is really, I know I find it, it's very easy to look at the news and think this is terrible, but it's much harder for us to examine ourselves sometimes, I think. So I think for me that really stood out. And I think maybe something we can think about in our discussion, the idea that if we're doing this with wrong intent, or we're bringing some kind of malice into our peacemaking, we're not properly actually working for it. And I think that's very challenging too. So the centrality of prayer, how it's framed within the chapter, is that it is inviting us to live in a world without or one where our wounds and needs are healed, essentially. So it's bringing us into this new way of speaking, of being together, and of knowing. So prayer isn't just about talking with God, but it's about moving away from the dwelling place of those who hate peace into the house of God. And in this way, prayer is framed as a converting power. So it's about transformation, it's about conversion, it's drawing us to live with God in the here and now, and a place where we're able to abide as peacemakers in a hostile world. It's also a place or a way that we know that we are loved. And again, that's the healing of those wounds and needs as we're entering into communion with God. So that's helping us to move away from actions that are rooted in our needs, or rooting peacemaking on the basis of fear and anxiety. And the chapter argues instead that really peacemaking should be rooted in love. And it says, the knowledge of being loved sets us free to look beyond the boundaries of death and to speak and act fearlessly for peace. This sets us free as sets us free as the value in our value and our worth is rooted in God, rather than having to chase external validation. And it then continues to say the paradox of peacemaking then is that we speak of peace in this world only when our sense of who we are is not anchored in the world. We can say we are for peace only when those who are fighting have no power over us. So prayer then isn't in contrast to action, rather prayer itself constitutes peacemaking. So it's part of this ongoing conversion process where we're finding our true selves, we're entering into the house of God's love and figuring out what it means to act in that way. So in prayer, we die to the self-destroying world of wounds and needs and enter into the healing light of Christ. In breaking through boundaries between life and death, it gives us freedom to stand in the midst of this world without being overwhelmed by fear. It is an act of stripping oneself of everything so as to be totally free to belong to God. chapter also addresses some of the difficulties of prayer and argues that we can feel resistance in prayer because it's asking us to let go of what is familiar to us, and to let go of control and to change our whole way of being. And fundamentally, I think, as someone mentioned earlier, this comes down to this idea of this desire for control, so this illusion of control as the basis of all destructiveness. So one of the examples given is the idea that we can protect ourselves through an arms race, for example. And prayer is about entering into a realization we belong to God, about entering into truth that we do not belong to this world because we have already died to it. And from that, we give up the fear of death that leads to this need to control. As in God, there is no death, but only life. But it's not about an escape from the world, but rather it's about a freeing to live creatively in it. And that's the basis of action. And it's also gives us the basis and the strength and stability, even when we might be tempted into despair as well. So as a very quick summary of I know what is a very in-depth look at prayer, I just want us to think about this in a little bit more depth in our groups. And I think we'll maybe have about 10 to 15 minutes in our groups and then come back and discuss. And just think about, what do you make of how Nouwen understands prayer? Nouwen understands prayer. How does this relate to your understanding of prayer? And how do you see prayer as linked to peacemaking? And then we might want to reflect a little bit on the context that we're in at the moment. So thinking about the news in the Middle East, what do we think the role of prayer might be? What should it be? How might we want to practically apply this? And if on the handout, there's a couple of quotes that I've selected that might be useful. I'll put those in the chat as well, just if anyone hasn't managed to get the handout. Okay, and then I will open all the rooms again. Okay, so I think we're all back. I gave us much more time than I intended to because I also got very absorbed in our conversation. I think if we maybe just go around the rooms again, and maybe if you just someone could volunteer to just give us a bit of a summary of what you were discussing in your room. Maybe if we start with group 3, the room that I was in.
I think some of what we were talking about was the challenge between action and prayer, and our tendency to, the more and more we see about what's going on in the world, we want to do something to help. I think someone in the group very much said, yeah, but to hand it over to God and to realise that peace is a gift from God. And it's not easy for us, and we find it challenging. And speaking personally, I feel that, if you're involved with groups that are doing stuff how you sometimes that can overload, and how someone says something about doing less to do more is sometimes a good way forward. So, but I'm sure if the others want to say anything, but that's what struck me about our conversation.
Thanks, Rosalind. Was there anyone else from group 3 who added?
We talked to somebody speaking about, doing an event after a catastrophe or a horrible something. But have we ever done anything before the event? I find that quite challenging. The word I was using was gratitude, and maybe it starts very, very early in children being introduced to sharing and maybe not controlling and not having to control. Or, otherwise we could run ourselves maybe ragged trying to respond to all the different situations. But just, I found that the thought, are we just doing something afterwards?
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. And I think, and just to add, we also spoke a bit about that prayer as formation or a communal part of prayer. And as prayer, I think you were giving the example of a prayer vigil after something had happened.
Yeah.
We were sort of talking about what about prayer as being part of that formation of who we become, but before something happens, or helping us think about how we act more generally. Which I think actually links quite well to Pope Leo's sort of that disarming piece. It's trying to make peacemakers in advance, isn't it, I suppose? Yeah. Thanks, Sylvia. Anyone from group 2? So that was, I can't remember who was in group 2. Anne, David, Grace, Jan and June.
We talked about all sorts of things, really. Peace is a fundamental gift of God. And we talked about peace involving reconciliation with the environment and the created order. We talked about maybe the author of the book being hard on himself and on everyone else, and about his self-criticism. We talked about why are we wanting peace? Why am I wanting peace? We talked about prayer in the sense of losing everything, letting go. And June spoke about her pain that she has, and that she's trying to radically accept that, which I found very touching, actually. And we talked about letting go and maybe describing an ideal to aim for, because we've got real anger in us, because of all the bad things that are happening, Middle East and Sudan and all the places in the world that are so violent. And we talked about the real anger that generates and how to deal with that. And whether how to express that and how to let go and let God actually support us and be our foundation, so to speak. So,
well, thank you very much, Anne. That's very, very powerful. I like that idea as well. You're talking about why do we want peace as well, and what's the reasons behind what we're doing. That's very powerful. Is there anyone else from group 2 who wanted to add anything in?
Well, I think Anne was very good on the idea of centering prayer, of just being present with God and accepting, because so many of us, and I know my reaction to the Middle East, because we were talking about how does this work for the Middle East, was railing against what was happening and wanting to take action, whatever the action might be. Perhaps we need to center ourselves and be calmer and trust God to do something in it.
Thanks, Grace. And then room 1. That was Elizabeth, Garrett, Owen, Rab, Thomas.
Garrett,
yeah, great. Yeah.
Garrett was going to say, but I'm not seeing him. Can you? Have we lost Garrett?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah.
Oh, no, he's there.
No.
He's just silenced. Well, he appears to be there, let's put it that way.
I think he's disappeared.
Yeah, it's disappeared now.
Elizabeth, can you give us a little flavour?
Yeah, we were talking about purifying the heart so that you're acting from decent motives, and Garrett had some good stuff about Henri Nouwen himself and how bogged down he was in his own faults and failings and so on, and he was suggesting that maybe a group would help you to purify your heart better. And so we talked a bit about group building, and then we moved on to listening and and synodality, but listening to people who we weren't necessarily expecting to have wisdom from. And I think that's where we got to as we wandered about a bit.
Okay.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I guess that sort of links in with the I can't remember, it's something under the chapter, isn't it? The idea of prayer as being this part of active listening within that communal setting of synodality. And yeah, thank you.
Garrett,
welcome back.
Am I back in now?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I think we were also sort of at the end talking about how synodality, maybe this has already been said, how synodality can be helpful in preparing us for peacework, and how in certain parts of Africa, Marion was telling us about, in Zambia, where the people have no pastor maybe or no priest, and how they do the work themselves and the prayer and the services. And then somebody else spoke about, I think it was, I'm not sure where it was, it might have been Rab, that about communities that would sometimes say to the priest they didn't want mass celebrated because they were having troubles and they hadn't been able to sort them out, so they weren't in a right place, which I thought was very interesting. They needed to be reconciled to each other first before they could celebrate.
Yeah, thanks for that, Garrett. That's a very powerful example. There's some bits and pieces that have been written on synodality as a process of non-violence. Marianne, if I send them to you, would you be able to share with people if that's of interest? And I think we're actually coming back to that idea that you're talking about, Elizabeth, as well, of that kind of active listening as well.
Could I just say at that point, also in our group there were a number of books and authors mentioned, and I was saying, if you've got a book or somebody that has made an impression on you, then email me that detail and I'll send it round to everybody as well, because I think those are valuable things to hear about, and choices about getting books like that.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Is there anything else that people wanted to share, or any other things that people wanted to bring up? Okay, in that case, then I'll bring us to a close for today. Next time we will be looking at the first part of the chapter on resistance, up until page 68, saying yes. I'm going to give a caveat. I think the first half of this chapter is quite a lot more bleak than the second half, so it might be a bit more of a hard going session, but hopefully followed by one that's a bit more uplifting. And I'll Marion, I'll send you all the details as well on the Syndiality, and then you can send them round too. But thank you very much, everyone, for sharing all of your insights and wisdom today. Marion, I'll hand back over to you to finish.
Brilliant.
Thank you very
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's absolutely, it's just why we've all come back together again, and I'm hoping that the new people that have joined us this time are enjoying it as much as we did the last time. I'm going to be a bit of a bore here and finish this with our Pax Christi current prayer, because I just feel, I think everybody has been feeling just overwhelmed by the events of the past few days, and I hope that our prayer just kind of helps us a little bit. But thanks everybody, and we'll see you the next time. And in the meantime, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear Father in heaven, you see every injustice, every violent act, every contravention of peace. We seek your guidance as we turn to our earthly leaders, hoping to change hearts, convince minds, and empower them to bring peace to the innocent. We pray that you will comfort the wounded, the bereaved, the disinherited. Lord, help us to make our common home a haven of non-violence. Amen.
Amen.